What's up, guys? You are listening to a October 20th edition of the SplashTag Podcast. My name is Matt. I'm back hosting the podcast today. Unfortunately, I can't be joined by my usual, fellow, partner in crime, co-host, podcast partner, whatever you want to call it, Joe. But it is October 20th, and the NBA season starts on the 22nd at, I think it's 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. Eastern, when the Pelicans will take on the defending NBA champions in the Toronto Raptors, as they have their usual ring ceremony and whatnot, as they always do on opening nights. So one thing that we really wanted to do was do an NBA preview podcast, and so that's what today's podcast is going to be. Now, there's only so much you can do in a preview, right? You can talk about things to look for, projections and whatnot, but as best as I can, I'm gonna try to keep this at least original in that it'll have hopefully meaningful and new analysis that you might not have thought about previously. That's what the hope is. So without further ado, I'm going to just kind of jump right into it. So hopefully by the time this is released, it's still kind of before the official start of the season. And I just did some Googling. It is 8 p.m. The first game starts 8 p.m. Eastern. So anyways, I'm a big as you can probably tell, me, Joe, and other people, the other friends of mine who have been on the podcast. A lot of us are really big basketball junkies and fans. And so what's interesting about, well, first and foremost, I get really excited for the NBA season because it really is the start of a quite a long journey when it comes to just following basketball and keeping up. What I mean by that is this year especially, it was kind of elongated or pronounced because of the FIBA Basketball World Cup, which I can briefly talk about in just a second. But essentially, once the NBA season gets rolling, it usually starts mid. Recently, they've made a push for mid-October, but mid-late October generally is when the NBA starts. Usually, that'll happen mid-late October, and then games start going. You start to get excited. They usually have a good opening week slate of games, and then a couple weeks after the NBA season starts, the college basketball season starts, and this really kind of becomes a nonstop just basketball cycle in terms of games played and things to follow until maybe the end of June, with the conclusion of the NBA draft, because the NBA draft is kind of a chance for you to see a lot of the guys that you watch play in the college ranks, may see where they're going to go in the league, and then on top of that, you're able to take a look at how teams might be kind of maneuvering for free agency. But the thing is, the NBA truly has become an 11-month, or the basketball, I would say, truly has become an 11-month sport. Because after the draft, there's obviously free agency, and the only real dead time I would say, is maybe that mid-August, early August, depending on the year, to late September. So I say all that to say, this year with, the FIBA Basketball World Cup starting on August 31st, and then also with the fact that, there's going to be Olympic basketball until I believe August of 2020, this year, I feel like there's a lot more kind of basketball to follow, and with the start of the NBA season coming up, it's gonna be a lot of basketball, but I love this sport so much. I wouldn't trade the world for it. But yeah, so Tuesday night starts. I'm gonna have to go back to watching games and keeping up with everything that's going on, following college, even a little bit internationally in a couple weeks, as well as obviously the NBA. So. The way I kind of think about the season one thing I do want to talk about briefly is the way I kind of look at the season is like there's the kind of opening weeks where you're excited to kind of get basketball back, and then you kind of start to see you get an early gauge on just how teams are, and I think that's going to be an especially true and interesting to monitor this year, and I'll talk about that in just a second. And then kind of, I think I will have to admit, I do think the NBA hits a little bit of a lull, maybe post All-Star break, and then March and through kind of March. And one reason that is probably the case for me, I feel that way, is because that's when college basketball really ramps up, especially obviously with March. But then once college basketball is over in March, it's the end of the NBA regular season, and you kind of start to see teams. There's a little bit of jockeying for playoff positioning, but on top of that, there's just a lot of you have a clear idea of the playoff picture, and then obviously the playoffs begin, and I absolutely love NBA playoff basketball. Like, this is a whole conversation for another day, but one thing I can say is that March Madness is very dramatic and has a lot, because there's so many more games, and this is one and done type, as in like one game, it's single elimination. But I have to say, watching NBA playoff basketball start to finish, especially the finals or the conference finals, it is basketball played at such a high level, such high intensity, with so much skill and finesse and strategic kind of strategy, X's and O's from the coaches. So I love the NBA. I love the NBA playoffs. Like, it is 11 out of 10 times I will tell you that the NBA, at least in terms of quality of play, is just so much better than college basketball. Don't let anybody ever tell you otherwise. But so before I talk about every team, all the teams in the NBA, or sorry, kind of what to look for in every team this year. There's been a lot of talk of, is this really the most, or a lot of talk of, this being the most wide open year, of this being like the most wide open year in recent NBA memory. And so I've thought about it. And so I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think it's wide open for a couple of reasons. One, this is the first time in a while we don't have a definitive favorite from either conference heading into a given year. And on top of that, I think this is probably the deepest NBA I have seen in quite some time, if not that I've seen in my lifetime since I started following the NBA. Because as you'll probably hear me talk about later on, I really think that there's like 13 or 14 teams in the West that wouldn't surprise me if they made the playoffs. Now, granted, with the West being that deep, teams are going to lose games, and there's going to be a defined playoff picture maybe by, January or so. There's not going to be 14 teams heading into March fighting for a playoff spot, I don't think. But that said, like, to me, like, there really are just a lot of really good teams, and I think this offseason, a lot of teams got better, especially in the West. I feel like a lot of teams got better, and like there's a lot of teams, and given how today's kind of culture of load management and preparing for the long haul and whatnot, I really do think that, like, in the West at least, and to a decent extent in the East, but I think the East is more so parity as opposed to the West being depth. I really do think that, like, on a given night, anyone can beat anyone in the regular season. And yes, I know you can roll your eyes at that and say, hey, well, they were resting 3 of the 5 starters, and this team was playing all their guys. Sure, but at the end of the day, like, I don't know, is it really that crazy to think that, like, Phoenix or say Dallas can be really competitive with a good team like the Lakers on in the regular season? I'm talking like in a given single game. Absolutely, and I think that makes for great theater. But I was kind of thinking back to like previous years. How is this really the most wide open year? And this is that I guess label is very subjective. But one thing I can say is So basically from 2016, the last 3 years, basically, when Kevin Durant signed with the Warriors, there was a definitive favorite in when it came to who was going to win the title. So there was definitely no favorite there. There was definitely not. It was definitely wasn't, quote, wide open. 2015-16 is actually interesting because a lot of people act like the 73-9 Warriors were the prohibitive favorites going in, but people forget that LaMarcus. A lot of people were saying, "Oh, the Warriors, they got lucky. They played an injured Cavs team. They weren't looked at as this juggernaut that would end up. No one went into that season thinking they would be this juggernaut that was going to win 73 games and almost win the NBA championship." That offseason, the Spurs signed LaMarcus Aldridge, and I actually remember there being a lot of buzz about the Spurs being the NBA title favorites. And Draymond has even spoken on the Bill Simmons podcast saying that kind of narrative, the fact that the Warriors felt like the 2015 title was disrespected and everyone immediately was saying the Spurs were going to win it all, that really motivated them. So I wouldn't say there was a juggernaut like heading into the season that we saw any juggernauts, but like I said, the Warriors and the Spurs were definitely looked at as the favorites, as well as the Cavs to come out of the Eastern Conference, which takes me to my other point. Basically, ever since LeBron formed the Heatles in 2010, the East has always been heading into the year with the East. We've always figured LeBron was going to win the East. The expectation every year in Miami was that they were going to get to the finals, and they should have been favorites to win it all. And they had that target on their back. And then, you have a couple transition years such as 2014-15 where there may not have been a clear title favorite, but I don't think those years were as deep, and that's why I don't think they were quite as, quote, wide open as this coming season. And then same like I just outlined with 2015-16. So, say all that to say, this really might be the most wide open year in quite some time. It might be for my kind of basketball viewing lifetime, and for me that's awesome. Like I honestly will watch the NBA regardless of whether there's I actually enjoy. There was a lot of backlash about the Durant Warriors making the NBA not fun to watch, but honestly, I actually did. I'm someone who just loves basketball so much that I can watch, as long as it's good basketball, I'll watch it. But I think this year it's especially intriguing because I feel like each game, on a game-to-game basis, I think we'll learn a lot more about teams in like random games in the regular season. Whereas before, random December game, Warriors, let's say Warriors like Timberwolves. I feel like that could be a little bit of a snooze, but like this year, I feel like when I look at the NBA schedule and I'm looking at games to circle on my calendar, I'm like, shit, there's so many games where I just want to get a good look at both teams. So without further ado, let's go on to talk about the actual teams. So I'm going to try to keep it quick since there are 30 teams I need to hit on, but I'm going to just try to just kind of talk about what I foresee and maybe just some interesting pointers. So let's start with, I'm going to do this by division. So starting with the Atlantic Division. So let's start with the Boston Celtics. The Boston Celtics, the big narrative is obviously that, you lose Kyrie, you place him with Kemba. You also lose Horford. And they're really hoping that Hayward can kind of look like the Hayward that we saw in Utah before he broke his leg. When I look at this roster, I absolutely love what they can do on the perimeter. I think they have a lot of offensive firepower on the perimeter. For instance, obviously you got Kemba, but off the bench, I think Carson Edwards could be a guy who just gets hot on random quarters. Obviously they took Romeo Langford with the lottery pick. I don't know how much he's going to contribute right away, but he is a player. And then on the perimeter, you have a lot of wings that are kind of interchangeable between the 2, 3, and 4 positions. I really like the fact that they can kind of trot out, Hayward, Brown, and Tatum. But the big concern that I have with them is what do they do at the center position? Because yes, the league is going smaller, but I do feel like there will be a lot of scenarios where maybe you're best playing Tatum at center. And if you do that, you're giving up a lot of size, you're giving up a lot of rebounding, and you're giving a lot of just interior physicality and rim protection. So I wonder, just because the only real centers on this roster that you can see playing, decent minutes are Enes Kanter, who I think is probably going to start, but there's a reason why he doesn't, don't get me wrong. I thought it was really admirable I thought it was great how he played this past year when he had the torn labrum, I think, torn labrum, I think, for Portland. But there's a reason why people say you can't play Kanter, or that his defense is a problem. And that's one of the things you want out of a center, right? You don't want, yes, Kanter will get you buckets, but you want someone who's going to be able to protect the rim. And so that takes me to the other guy, Robert Williams, who's a little smaller. He's considered more of a rim runner. That was at least kind of what we foresaw or kind of projected when he was coming out of Texas A&M, but he's only a second-year player, and we don't know. But I think I could definitely see Williams kind of 20 games in taking the starting position and really making a name for himself as a quality NBA starter. Not an all-star by any means, but a quality starting center, kind of in that Clint Capella type of role. So that's about it for the Celtics. I do think that they're a playoff team, but I think that maybe not having the crazy expectations of last year, kind of being free of all the drama that they had last year with Kyrie, I do think that might be able to put Brad Stevens back into what he's more used to. And with the exception of last year, I feel like Brad Stevens has always overachieved on the Celtics, or as the coach of the Celtics, and obviously during his days at Butler. So the Celtics they'll be a fun team to watch, but I see them more as kind of like a frisky playoff team as opposed to a real contender in the East. So let's move on to the Nets. It's basically a redshirt year for Kevin Durant. Hope he gets well soon. The Nets are interesting. They have a lot of quality NBA players. Obviously, they're going to have Kyrie essentially replace D'Angelo Russell. The one thing I don't know how I feel. The one thing I'm not totally on board with is, look, I get it. He was the main recruiter, or he's kind of what I call the handcuff deal, where you sign KD and Kyrie, and so you got to take care of their homie DeAndre Jordan. But I don't know how much I love the idea of DeAndre Jordan taking minutes from Jarrett Allen and then not giving an opportunity to a guy like Nick Claxton, who they took with the first pick of the second round. Just because I don't know if DeAndre Jordan is, if the Nets obviously want to build up to a championship, but I don't know if DeAndre Jordan's going to be. I don't know if DeAndre Jordan is the best guy you can trot out there at center, if you're going to be, a title contender, not a title contender, a championship team. And it's not that I think DeAndre Jordan can't contribute or anything, but it's also just a dynamic thing, right? You're not going to be able to play him and Jarrett Allen at the same time. And I love what I've seen from Jarrett Allen in terms of his kind of upward trajectory. So, you're not going to be able to play them both a lot of minutes together, and you're paying DeAndre Jordan double digits each year. Jarrett Allen wants to get paid. I think that can be a very funky dynamic that could be getting stirred up. But all that said, the fact that the Nets were able to land Kyrie and Kevin Durant, especially over the Knicks, that in itself should be celebrated. Even though, as I'm sure most people expect, this season it's going to be more so the Kyrie show, and they'll be in the playoff mix. They'll be in the playoff team, I would bet. But this is obviously not the year where you would maybe bank on them to win a title or to be a serious title contender. So they do have a lot of nice perimeter firepower that I like, with Taurean Prince and Karis LeVert and Spencer Dinwiddie, and the fact that they're going to have some of those guys off the bench. And Joe Harris. How could I forget about Joe Harris? So those guys, along with he's not quite a perimeter player, but Kurix. I probably said that wrong, but whatever. I do like what the Nets have. I think they're going to be fun to watch for a decent amount of the year. But yeah, I guess we can move on to their counterpart in the Big Apple with the New York Knicks. Now, look, the Knicks did a nice thing in that they kind of kept their flexibility, but and this is a big caveat. And don't get me wrong, I like the guys that they signed, but come on, it has to be disappointing when you're the Knicks and there's all this talk about, and part of it I understand is the New York media and market, but there's all this hype about potentially them carving up cap space, and they got rid of their only proven all-star in Kristaps Porzingis to open up cap space, and then the owner talked big, and as a result, and when you see the final result, the Knicks did not sign any major free agent. So that's got to be disappointing. Anybody that knows me knows that Julius Randle is my favorite power forward, maybe of all time. I'm talking strictly in terms of just watching. I just love Julius Randle. So I am rooting for this team, and not this team, but I'm rooting for Randle to do well. I think he's got a chance to really show that he can be, that he's going to have a long, successful, all-star worthy career. But it's a really interesting dynamic here. There's a lot of young guys who you would like to see get more kind of time, like Kevin Knox, but then you also sign these solid, not awful, but like solid vets who are going to expect to play, whether it's Wayne Ellington, Marcus Morris, Elfrid Payton, Bobby Portis, and then obviously I mentioned Julius Randle, who I think is going to be the best player on this team. Plus you got RJ Barrett, who you just took number 3, so don't think they're going to win a lot of games, but also not really sure how much I'll tune in unless it's close game, but yeah. Knicks fans, I'm sorry, it's not quite your year. Moving on to the 76ers. So the Sixers are widely considered one of the two favorites for like team to come out of the East, along with the Bucks, and I think that's on point. I really like what they did this offseason, though I did like the fact that Jimmy Butler was their closer. Was like the closer and the guy who could kind of create his own offense when things got really muddled down in the playoffs. That said, adding Al Horford it's not going to hurt their defense. Also lets you rest Embiid a little bit more, and so that's obviously big. And then Josh Richardson is a solid two-way player. So that's those are moves that I like. And so they have this massive starting lineup, and on top of that, I do like the fact that they've essentially in the draft they've gone for like these athletic wings who have two-way potential or a lot of defensive potential and maybe could become solid two-way players. And essentially, given that he barely played last year, this year they're going to get hopefully a full year from Zaire Smith, who was their first-round pick last year, as well as the guy they took this year, Matisse Thybulle, who in the preseason, granted I don't want to put too much stock into that, but in the preseason he has already shown signs of being an elite defender. So that's good. And on top of that, you hope to see internal improvement from Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, and then you hope Tobias Harris can with more kind of a training camp under his belt and more time with the team to be a little more comfortable than he was last season, kind of in the half season he had and with after he got traded from the Clippers. So I'm expecting the Philadelphia 76ers to be one of the teams I watch a lot this year. And I'm expecting them to spoiler alert, I'm expecting them to be the 1 seed in the East. I do think that there's going to be a lot of load management for Embiid, but I think they're deep enough and just good enough to still get that 1 seed, even if they sit Embiid, 15 games? So, moving on, that takes us to the Toronto Raptors. So the Raptors, they actually recently just signed Siakam to a max extension. He appears to be the face of the franchise kind of going forward once Kyle Lowry's out of town. Not out of town, but once Kyle Lowry's either leaves, gets traded, or retires a Raptor. Sorry. No disrespect to Kyle Lowry. So that's that. Marc Gasol opted in for the final year of his deal with the player option that he had. And then Kyle Lowry recently got that extension that he was that 1-year extension, which honestly I think actually helps his trade value. So the big elephant in the room here is that they lost Kawhi, and I'm sure these guys are motivated to show that they can win, that they were not just the Kawhi, like they were not just Kawhi. And Masai is one of the best, if not the best GM in the NBA. So all that said, so I do think the Toronto Raptors are probably in that upper echelon of the East, though not quite in that Milwaukee, Philadelphia tier. But that said, this has to be the weirdest title defense year I've ever seen, because I mean it's unprecedented for a Finals MVP to leave the team that they had just won Finals MVP with. And so it'll be interesting. It's definitely a weird feeling where, heading into a season, the reigning NBA champions are not expected to be even like a conference finals team. But all that said, I do enjoy watching Kyle Lowry play. So I think that'll be that plus the improvement of Siakam, and see what kind of leap he can take, and the return of OG Anunoby. I think will be reasons to tune into the Raptors. Chicago. I actually think Chicago, and I'm not a hipster for saying this. This has been kind of circulating, but I actually think Chicago might make the playoffs. They obviously have a lot of young guys who have shown flashes and improvement over the years with like LaVine and Laurie. Otto Porter is a guy who plays his role so well, and then obviously they just took Kobe White in the draft. 2018 they took Wendell Carter, and then they signed Thad Young, who is like a professional and a guy who was going to defend at a solid clip and then get you some buckets. So really like that, as well as Satoransky, who is just a solid like NBA role player. So I actually have the Bulls sneaking into the playoffs. I was actually fortunate enough to see Zach LaVine play live this summer. Actually, I'll talk about that a little bit as I kind of transition from East to West. But yeah, I think this team's going to make the playoffs, maybe as like an 8 or 7 seed. I think they're going to be frisky. And I wanted to say that Kobe White could be like a dark horse Rookie of the Year guy, or a guy that you might want to bet on to win Rookie of the Year because of how the odds are structured. But I'm not sure that's quite the case, because I do see them still giving Chris Dunn a decent like amount of minutes at the point, and this team has young talent, so it's not like Kobe's just gonna be given the ball and go. So that, plus the fact that I don't know if Jim Boylan's I don't know if it's his coaching style to just roll the ball out and let a rookie who's a little out of control and doesn't have it's like a little, I wouldn't say maybe out of control is the wrong term, but I don't think he's just going to give the ball to Kobe White and say go. I think Kobe White is a guy who will play at a very frantic pace, and that can be a good thing. And a guy who his decision making is not quite in that elite like smooth tier of some of the top, like what you'd like to see from a point guard. So all that considered, I think he's gonna have a good rookie year. There's gonna be some games where he really struggles with efficiency, but I also think that there's gonna be some games where his the good height that he has as a point guard combined with the speed and like offensive like scoring prowess, I think that's gonna shine through. But like I said, I do feel like Jim Boylan is the type of coach who's gonna like trust Chris Dunn as a guy who's more so just going to be hard-nosed, play good defense, and then facilitate. So I don't think that Kobe White will win Rookie of the Year, although there was a part of me that for a second at least thought about Kobe, giving Kobe a shot at Rookie of the Year. Cleveland, honestly, the most interesting thing about Cleveland is where's Kevin Love gonna go? Is he gonna stick around or is he gonna get traded? And then how's John Beilein gonna be as an NBA coach? I don't think this team's gonna win a lot of games. Sorry. Moving on. Well, I guess it also might be interesting to monitor if Colin Sexton and Garland can play together. I don't know how that works defensively if you're trying to build like a title contending roster. I heard that Cleveland thought that Garland and Colin Sexton could be like Dame and CJ, but I think that's incredibly off. Yeah, I'm not going to divulge too much into this because I honestly don't think I'll be watching too much Cleveland Cavaliers basketball this year. The Pistons. Honestly, Blake had a really nice year last year, and Drummond's in a contract year. So, and look, I think Dwayne Casey's actually a good coach, but I don't know. Yeah, it's tough cause like they were an 8 seed last year. I don't really see how if they got that much better. I do think Derrick Rose is a plus. They'll be in the playoff mix, I'm sure, like in that 7 to 11 range, but like I don't know. I don't see. They definitely didn't improve enough for me to pencil them into the playoffs. But they're also not bad enough, and I respect the personnel too much to just say that they're not going to be a playoff team. So I don't know. I personally have them maybe like finishing 9th, but we shall see. I'm gonna try to speed this up, just because I don't want to talk for like. I don't want to spend like 2 hours just talking about, what to watch and whatnot, even though that would be great. So moving on to the Pacers. A lot of people are really high on the Pacers, and not high on the Pacers, but like a lot of people are, have them in that maybe upper half, maybe top 5 of the NBA Eastern Conference. But here's my thought. I do think that Nate McMillan has really kind of he's really done a good job in Indiana, kind of a little bit of a rebrand, or kind of a improvement of his reputation compared to his prior tenure in Portland. But so I really respect how Nate McMillan has really been able to overachieve. But I really just think that Oladipo's probably going to be out a little longer than we think, and this team's going to play hard, and this team's going to play well together, but I feel like their ceiling, unless Oladipo comes back early and is better than he was before he got hurt right away, or maybe not even right away, but like can be in that ballpark for most of the season and play like 60 or so games, I see this team's ceiling as maybe like a 6th seed. At best the 5th, which is what they were last year, but I think they have a lot of nice young assets, so I do think they're a couple they could make some interesting moves and then get Oladipo back, and that could make them really interesting in coming years, but this season I'm not sure. So moving on, talked about the Bucks. The Bucks are interesting just because I don't think they got better per se, but they kept most of the core, obviously minus Brogdon, intact. I think they lose Brogdon, but they do get a little bit more depth per se. Obviously with like Kyle Korver, even like Robin Lopez, Wesley Matthews, and then hopefully you can get an increased. You can see improvement from a guy like DJ Wilson, who in college was this 6'10" forward who could shoot it at a decent clip. So honestly, you're just hoping that Giannis can improve, because he's young, so I feel like that's a very fair thing to maybe expect. For context, it's kind of nuts. He's gonna turn 25 in December, so let that sink in. But yeah, the reason I see a little bit of regression this year in terms of the regular season record is just because last year they were the best team in the East, in the NBA actually, record wise. But this year they lose Brogdon, and I think that teams are gonna have more. They're gonna be better prepared and know how to prepare for the Bucks. So I think they're gonna be second in the East in terms of regular season. What I think is going to be very important for them is how do they finish up? How do they finish up their season in the playoffs? Because last year, they were up 2-0 on the Raptors, and they had it. Not they had it, but they were in a close game. Game 3 went to overtime, and if that game goes in their favor, who knows? Probably. I mean, obviously with the Raptors, they would have probably beaten the Raptors if they were up 3-0, and that's a different. That would mean we would have Bucks Warriors, and who knows? Like at that point, the NBA would be a little bit different. So those are my thoughts on the Bucks. Let's move on to the Southeast Division. So, the Southeast Division is interesting because I think it's a pretty weak I think it's the worst division probably in the NBA. Let's start with Atlanta. So they lost Dwayne Dedmon. Who was one of their better interior defenders. I think that's going to show. And I also think that, but that said, I think Bruno Fernando can actually help them out a little bit. He was their second round pick. I really liked him. I thought he was a first round talent. But the Hawks, I think the Hawks are still a year away. Don't get me wrong. I love the Hawks' young core. I love what they're doing. I think Trae Young is one of the more fun point guards to watch, young point guards to watch. But I do think they're about a year away. I think they need to build a little more cohesion, and then let the young guys grow, play through mistakes. They might be able to add a free agent this in the summer of 2021. Like I'm talking like a role player who can kind of help take them from lottery team to the playoffs. I like the fact that they just kind of, in the lottery, they took two wings, kind of with the mindset of like, hey, if we take a crack at two kind of wing players in the lottery, hopefully one of them hits the way we want, and then, you put Trae Young, a productive wing player, John Collins, Herter. That's a great young nucleus to build around. So it remains to be seen. Is that going to be DeAndre Hunter? Is it going to be Cam Reddish? Is it going to be both? Maybe it'll be DeAndre Bembry. Jabari Parker. I don't know if he's still kind of young, so maybe you could throw in Jabari in that. Although obviously Jabari's, his, I guess, lack of focus on defense probably wouldn't put him in that kind of 3-and-D category. But who knows? Maybe he can be a great scoring plug off the bench. So Atlanta's going to be a lot of fun to watch. I think they're probably the league pass team of the East, but like I said, I think they're still about 1 year away. And I'm actually on Wikipedia right now, and it says that Chandler Parsons, who, yes, is on the Atlanta Hawks roster, apparently he's suspended. So that's interesting. I'm doing some Googling. Let's see. What is he suspended for? Maybe Wikipedia has it wrong, and maybe he's just injured. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything about a suspension. So yeah, that's it for the Hawks. The Hornets, wow. The Hornets, so I love Malik Monk. He has not had a great first 2 years, but I was a big believer in him coming out of Kentucky. And so I will continue to. I'm not selling my Malik Monk stock, hoping that he might get more minutes this year and really show like why he belongs why he can be a special player in the NBA. But him and Miles Bridges and PJ Washington I like, but like, I'm sure this is no surprise. This Charlotte team is not going to be good. They gave a big contract to Terry Rozier, and so Ryan Russillo joked that he was going to call him Scary Contract Terry. So there's that, and the fact that they're over. I think they're around, if not over, the luxury tax, or at least the hard cap. Sorry, and that was after they lost Kemba Walker. So I don't know what to. Maybe if they surprise me, so be it. But I'm not betting on them to win a lot of games. So I think they're probably the worst record in the NBA. And so at this point, you just want to whip out the tanking slogans. Down the hole for Cole. I don't know. Let's get LeVar in Charlotte. NBA's backseat for Tyrese Maxey. You hurt for Stewart. 5 men get you wise men. Whatever slogan you can come up with. I think that's Charlotte's MO for the time being. And what's crazy is next summer they'll be able to trade some of their bad contracts because they'll be expiring. But it's like, wow, you look at this roster and like Batum and his contract go on for another 2 years. Like, sheesh. I don't even know what to say. The Miami Heat. I'm going to try to keep speeding these up. Miami Heat. I am ride or die with Tyler Herro. He was my favorite player to watch in college basketball last year. I actually think that he's going to be, if Zion gets hurt and misses a decent amount of time, I think Tyler Herro is going to win Rookie of the Year. And I think the Heat are going to overachieve because they have a lot of quality NBA players. And I think that I trust Spo to get the most out of guys. I think there's a leap from Bam Adebayo. And I love the fact that they're embracing that this is Jimmy Butler's team. He's the go-to guy, and he's the guy who really embodies that Heat culture that's, so hyped up. I think the Heat are actually going to be the third. In terms of regular season standings, I think they're going to be third in the East, and Tyler Herro is going to continue to turn a lot of heads. And a lot of people are going to be like, oh, yeah, I knew he was going to be good, yada, yada, yada. Or like, hey, I've been on board with Tyler Herro. I just want to let people know, before Tyler Herro played a second at Kentucky, I explained that I thought that he was going to kind of he was going to follow that Devin Booker trajectory to the NBA, and he was my guy. Even when he shat the bed against Duke in that first game in the Champions Classic where they got smoked, I was all in on Tyler Herro. I was surprised that he was able to get his way into the lottery. Like, not that it surprised me necessarily, but I didn't see that heading into the year. I thought he would be in maybe that 20 range. But that said, Tyler Herro, love that guy. I will ride or die with Herro to the abyss. So I think the Heat are going to be good. Orlando Magic, a lot of question marks here. A lot of question marks, and that the main ones that I see are Markelle Fultz for obvious reasons, and Mo Bamba. Mo Bamba, he got hurt, didn't get to play as much last year, and then they re-signed Vucevic, so it's like, how many minutes is Bamba going to be able to play, and how productive is he going to be in those minutes? Well, I'll be very curious to monitor that, because they do have a lot of big guys. So I guess we'll see. Clifford did a good job last year getting this team to the playoffs, but I don't know. I don't know if I love that Aminu contract, but who knows? They're kind of like Detroit, right? Like, they're well coached and they're not awful, but I also can't pencil them into the playoffs. So we shall see. But I'm excited to watch Aaron Gordon and Jonathan Isaac as this versatile kind of front court pairing. And that takes me to the home team, the Washington Wizards. Bradley Beal recently just signed his extension, which is honestly, it's probably good for both sides because it makes Bradley Beal gets his money. And he's still pretty tradable. So, but he just can't be traded this basically for this season. But I don't know. John Wall's out for the year. Hard to see them making the playoffs, but I think it's a good chance to see. I think Scott Brooks is as a guy, as a coach. I think his one of his stronger suits is like developing younger guys, or kind of grooming younger guys to be professionals. And so maybe you hope this that he might be able to positively impact guys like Rui Hachimura, Thomas Bryant, who's not that. I mean, yeah, he's young. Thomas Bryant, as well as Admiral Schofield, who I really like, Mo Wagner. So we'll see, but I don't know. There's a lot of. I'm honestly not as low on Washington as most people are. A lot of people think they're the worst team in the league. I think that's Charlotte, but that said, I'd be crazy if I said that. It would be a little out there for me to just say, oh, Washington's gonna make the playoffs. So, yeah, that is all of the Eastern Conference. So I'm at about the 45-minute mark. So I'm going to pause right around here, and then maybe the next episode that I put up, or I'll put up in like a part two, I'll be able to discuss the Western Conference and the overall playoff picture at slash awards. So until then, I will catch you soon. All right, so I'm back. Gonna do the Western Conference and the kind of the bigger playoff picture in NBA awards. But before I do that, I just wanted to quickly talk about really cool in-person experience I got to have where, two. There were two. The first was that this past summer, while I was in Seattle, I was able to go to the Jamal Crawford Pro AM, where essentially he gets guys from the area or some maybe former teammates, just people he has relationships with, ranging from high school, college to the pros. And they play pickup basketball, and so I got to see a lot of guys there. I'll be talking about that, I'm sure, plenty on the podcast throughout this year. And then on top of that, this past Friday, where I actually got to go to a forum where Adam Silver, yes, the Adam Silver, was the commissioner of the NBA, was the keynote speaker, and it was really interesting. I could talk a little, I could go all day about, hearing Adam Silver speak for about an hour. But one thing I can say is that he was actually really candid with regards to how he addressed the NBA controversy in China, and how he broke down why it was not as simple or as two-sided, like as morality as versus money, where it's like it's one or the other. So I thought that was really interesting. If people want, I'm sure I could talk more in depth about what Commissioner Silver said. But I just wanted to kind of share those two really cool, unique experiences I got to have. So moving on to the West. So doing this podcast and just kind of talking it out, having kind of talking about all this to myself, I realized like it takes a lot out of you. So shout out to Stephen A. Smith for being on the radio for 2 hours a day, just kind of talking, like being just by himself. So that that's it takes a lot. So moving forward, I'm gonna keep the West. I'm gonna go talk about the West. I'm gonna try to make this move faster, team to team. So starting with the Dallas Mavericks. The Mavs have one of the more exciting, I would say more skilled and exciting duos in Luka and Porzingis. The question just becomes who's that third guy. But that said, they have a lot of really quality, like complementary guys. Seth Curry, Tim Hardaway, Justin Jackson. Jalen Brunson showed signs, and then Dwight Powell, DeLon Wright. So I really think that Carlisle's a great coach. I don't have the Mavs in the playoffs, but I do think that they can hover in the play. They can be in that playoff territory. So Moving on to the Rockets, in an earlier episode after the Russell Westbrook trade, my buddy Sid came on and we talked about the Houston Rockets and the kind of the aftermath of the Russell Westbrook trade. And most of my feelings on that haven't changed. Essentially, I do think that Houston's going to be I could see them being an incredibly successful regular season team, just because it's really hard to just game plan on a random night for Harden and Westbrook, especially with Westbrook being, this intense guy that he is. Like, he can just assert so much chaos and kind of this franticness to a regular season NBA game when guys are maybe kind of load managing and taking the night off and whatnot. So I think they'll be very successful in the regular season. My one thing that I could see deteriorating the season has been touched upon by many people, including like Woj and Zach Lowe, where Mike D'Antoni in this whole contract situation where he could potentially be a lame duck, and the fact that, from my personal opinion, is that D'Antoni's never been the best when it comes to managing player personalities. So that'll be really interesting to see. But Houston, they're basically just they have a lot of like guys who are able to play within their system, and then even though Westbrook may not be the best shooter when it comes to the Rocket system, there's so much that he can contribute to that. But I still am uncertain about how I feel about them in the playoffs, but regular season I think they'll be good. But that said, this whole D'Antoni situation does have me on edge a little bit. Like, I could see this imploding if D'Antoni, if there's a little bit of disappointment in D'Antoni, a lot of finger pointing, and D'Antoni gets axed, and then they have an interim head coach who maybe isn't as good of a coach and whatnot, and so forth. So we'll see. Memphis is the only team in the West that I think probably doesn't have probably would surprise. I think Memphis is the only team in the West where I would be surprised if they made the playoffs. They just have a lot of young guys. They're not going to actually play. They're going to try to parlay Iguodala for other assets. So I love the young nucleus that they have, but when do rookies and sophomores when do they lead their team to the playoffs in a stacked Western Conference? It doesn't happen that often. So I think Brandon Clark, well, mainly Jaren, and then obviously the complementary pieces of Brandon Clark. Yeah, hey, this is probably unpopular, but even like Grayson Allen, and Dylan Brooks and whatnot. First off, I find it so funny that they're on the same team now, but it's gonna be a fun team to watch. Young up and coming coach, hope maybe in Taylor Jenkins. So they'll be fun to watch, but yeah, not expecting a lot of wins. I think they're probably near the bottom of the West, even though I think they're going to be is going to be league pass as shit. Speaking of league pass, that takes us to the next team, the New Orleans Pelicans. They might be the deepest team in the NBA in terms of they have the most guys who I would want in my rotation, right? I think they go about maybe 10, 11 deep, which is good, especially in the regular season. The thing is, there's health concerns right now with, a lot of their guys. Will we see a full season for Brandon Ingram? Lonzo had surgery. He also supposedly fixed his jump shot, but let's see if that's for real. And then Zion's hurt at the moment. So we'll see. They're obviously going to be in the hunt for a playoff spot, at least the expectation heading into the year is. But if they were in the East, I would pencil them into the playoffs. But it's just the West is tough. So that said, I think they're probably when Zion is healthy, I think that Zion and Lonzo combination works. They play off each other so well. And then I love when I'm imagining tuning in to watch them on a random night on League Pass, they seem like they're going to be the League Pass team of the year, as long as Zion can be healthy for the majority of the season. That takes us to the Spurs. So the Spurs, this is pretty simple, right? You can't ever count Popovich out. I love them picking up Keldon Johnson late in the first round. It was stupid for so many teams to pass on Keldon like that. They're gonna get DeJounte Murray back, who missed last year with the ACL tear, and I think Derek White's ready to take a step forward. Lonnie Walker as well. But that said, also you can't bet against Pop. But you know what I'm going to do? I said this in a previous podcast with Sid, but I look. I think the Spurs will be in the hunt for a playoff spot. It would not surprise me at all if they're in the playoffs. But when I pick 8 teams, as I will do later in the podcast, I don't have the Spurs in the playoffs. Sorry to say that, but it's just I had to leave someone out, and I know people are gonna say, how could you bet against the Spurs? But it's not like they've not lost, but it's not like this is the same. This is like me betting against Tim Duncan, Manu, and Tony Parker. And so we'll see. I'm curious. I think the one thing the Spurs have that's going in their favor is that they're usually well prepared and obviously incredibly well coached. So in the regular season, they always beat up on teams that are not prepared and are worse or like not good. So in other words, I heard a stat that like in the past 5 years, they have a 80%, they have a .8 win percentage against teams that are 500 or under. So in other words, they're gonna beat the bad teams. So whenever they play some of the teams in the East, they'll probably be able to wax them. But and they're hard to they're consistent. So that is the one thing they have going for them. Like they're probably not going to beat themselves and have silly losses to get them out of the playoffs, but I just don't know if they're as good as a lot of the teams in the West, which is why I don't have them in. The Denver Nuggets, they won a lot of games last year, second seed in the West, almost made it to the conference finals. And then obviously everyone talked this offseason about how Porter, Michael, and PJ could be the X factor and push them over the top. I honestly think that obviously can be true for Michael Porter Jr. I'm curious to see if Jared Vanderbilt can be a guy who can get quality minutes because a lot of the qualities that people are lauding Jeremy Grant for, who's now on their team, I honestly could see Jared Vanderbilt stepping into, a guy who can defend multiple positions, tough as hell, rebounds the ball incredibly well. So we'll see. But I mean, this team's going to be good. I think they're going to win a lot of games, and I think Jokic is going to be in the MVP conversation. And they have a lot of depth, right? And on top of that, they took a chance. A second round pick, so it's not really much of a gamble on Bol Bol. And if you can get anything out of Bol Bol in like a couple of years, that's a win. But Malik Beasley, Will Barton, Torrey Craig, they just have a lot of guys. Gary Harris, obviously, and then Jamal Murray. Maybe he's got another leap in him. Monte Morris, Mason Plumlee. They just have a lot of guys. I don't mean to name their whole roster, but they just have a lot of guys who you can either see continue to improve or you can just trust to be competent. So that's my thought. And the fact that they have a little bit of upside with regards to Michael Porter Jr. and Jared Vanderbilt potentially being like a swing guy, like in terms of swinging a couple games and adding a couple wins to the regular season record. I think the Nuggets are going to be good again. The T-Wolves. So the Timberwolves. The best way I can sum up the Timberwolves is I think Towns has a chance to be the best big man in the NBA in a couple years. Love Towns. Need to see a little more kind of competitiveness on his end from the defensive side, and I want to see him be a little bit less of I want to see a little bit less stat padding and a little more like true like team first, like let's try to fucking win these games type of attitude, and kind of style of play. But that said, I like a lot of their guys on the Timberwolves, but first off, the West is just deep. So I don't have them in the playoffs, but like I said, it wouldn't surprise me if they're in that 7-8 seed ballpark. But the one thing is, I love a lot of the guys they have, like Towns, Culver, even like I think Covington is good. But the problem is they just have a couple contracts that I think are really, really hamstringing them. I'm not a buyer. I know a lot of people aren't, but I am definitely not. Pro Andrew Wiggins. I in 2014 I thought the Cavs should have taken Embiid or Jabari. I was pro Jabari over Wiggins, so I'm not in on Wiggins. Gorgie Jang, he gets paid. He's getting a lot, but I also think that that's expiring soon. But yeah. Teague, I think, also has a couple years left on his deal. So I don't know. I really just think that you need something. You need anything but you need Andrew Wiggins to cut it out with the empty calorie stats, because I have never seen a more of an empty calorie stats kind of player like Wiggins get paid so much. So that's my thought on Minnesota. OKC. Love Shea. Love a lot of. I mean, obviously the Thunder got a massive haul when they shipped their two superstars out, but the fact that they have a lot of competent NBA players, and if Chris Paul sticks around, I really don't think this is going to be one of the worst teams in the league. They're not going to. I wouldn't project them to make the playoffs, but I do think that they can take. I think they can be competitive night to night, especially if the Chris Paul plays like 70 games, increases his trade value and whatnot. So, I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if they were an 8 seed. I wouldn't bet on it. I would say maybe I'd give them like a 30% chance of getting that 8 seed. That would maybe even like 20, 25. But they're going to be frisky and competitive in the West. Like, they're not going to just roll over. This isn't like they're not going to be like Phoenix from last year. So is, I guess, the point that I'm trying to get at. They have a lot of quality guys. And Danilo Gallinari was pretty good in the regular season last year. So the fact that he and Chris Paul are going to be on the roster, I mean, I obviously think that Danilo Gallo is going to get traded. But, when for 40 games or so, like, I do think that Chris Paul and Gallo, Shea, Hamidou Diallo, and then Roberson and Schroeder, like, that's not a bad team. Steven Adams. That's not a bad team. And maybe Terrence Ferguson will have with more kind of a role in the offense. Maybe he can show why he was, a first-round pick. And maybe he can kind of live up to that status as a sharpshooter. That takes me to Portland. I love Portland. I love watching Dame and CJ. I think Dame is the second best point guard in the NBA behind Steph. And big fan of CJ's podcast, but I do wonder if I love a lot of what they have on the perimeter. And I like Zach Collins, but with Nurkic out for a lot of the year, they're going to be splitting a lot of those center minutes between Whiteside and Collins. And I think that Whiteside and Collins, interestingly, they kind of bring opposite things to the table. I really like kind of the motor and a lot of the skill that Zach Collins is able to play with, and his mobility. But he needs to get stronger. He needs to be able to not foul so frequently. Meanwhile, Whiteside, I mean, he's been foul prone, but also he had a lot of empty stats those later years in Miami. And I just wonder what his focus and where his mindset's at. I think he'll be good. I think it'll be good to have him with Dame. I like this Portland team. Bazemore's a great addition, and I think the young guys they've given themselves a little bit of a long-term upside with some of their young guys, whether it's Gary Trent, Rodney Hood. I like them taking Nasir Little, and everybody's been raving about Anthony Simons, but I wouldn't bet on them to make a Western Conference Finals again. But I do think that they're going to be a playoff team. But that said, don't sleep on the fact that they lost Harkless, Aminu. Like, those guys were playing a lot of the minutes at the wing. So, I mean, we'll see, right? But I expect Portland to be in the playoffs, and I expect them to be, like, safely in the playoffs. But I do think there is a scenario where they aren't in the playoffs. Like, I don't think that that's crazy, right? Like, I don't have them penciled in the way I have, the Clippers or the Jazz penciled in, so to speak. So speaking of the Jazz, I love what the Jazz did this offseason. I actually think that the Jazz are going to be the best regular season team in the West. I think they're going to win somewhere from 55 to 62 games. Because basically, here's what they have. They've consistently had one of the best defenses in the NBA, and defense travels especially on the road and on a night-to-night in an 82-game season. That regular season defense will travel. They have a very good coach in Quinn Snyder. And I love their offseason. Like, they basically just improved because in the playoffs, you saw that Donovan Mitchell got kind of worn down when he was the only guy who could create his own shot and kind of, be a go-to scorer. They kind of addressed those issues, or like kind of tried to alleviate the offensive load from Donovan Mitchell without compromising without compromising their ability to defend at a high level. This is a small thing, but I think Miaoni, the second round pick, if he gives them anything, I think he fits into the bill of what they're trying to get done as a guy who will play defense and be able to hit, be competent as a shooter. I think he's going to be good. Not good, but I think if he can be anything, I think that's great. And he was taking 58, so I think that he could potentially be like a 10 minutes a game guy who, when he's in the game, he doesn't screw. He doesn't give the other team he doesn't totally like screw you over as like your 10th guy. But the big additions are Bogdanovich and Mike Conley. I just think that having the ball a little bit more out of Donovan Mitchell's hands will be able to help him so much. And Mike Conley, one of the better floor generals in the NBA, also a fantastic kind of team player. Doesn't complain about his role that he's by all accounts a fantastic teammate, loves to get guys involved, and so having him, and he competes defensively, so having him with Donovan Mitchell, I think that's a great partnership, and so I think the Jazz are going to be the number 1 seed in the West, and the best, actually, yeah, maybe challenge for the best record in the NBA. That takes us to the Pacific Division. Let's start with the 5-time defending Western Conference champ, Golden State. It's obviously a bit of a transition year. I think they're going to make the playoffs, but like I said about Portland, wouldn't surprise me if they missed it. Like if, maybe halfway through they kind of realize it's not their year, and then, Steph starts to take more nights off. Like they don't play Steph, they load manage him. And it's him and Draymond and whatnot. So we'll see. I'm not going to bet against the Golden State Warriors. I just have too much respect for that infrastructure, the personnel. I really think they're going to be maybe in that 6-5, best case 4 seed range. But who knows? I do think that. I think there's been a lot of talk of, Russell needs the ball. Can he play with Steph? Now, granted, I know that's not the most. That's not a defense. That's defensively that backcourt's not going to lock you down. But I think the whole D'Angelo playing with the ball or needing the ball is a little overblown. Like when I watched him at Ohio State, I always thought that he could be a great catch and shoot guy in the NBA. On top of being a guy who could create his own offense, in the pick and roll and off the dribble. I'll be very curious to see how much of the motion offense Steve Kerr is willing to change up a little bit for this, because I do think that. In the past, they kind of used the KD and Steph pick and roll in the playoffs when they needed to. But I wonder if this year they might use, the Draymond Steph pick and roll more in the regular season to kind of keep them in the playoff hunt. But I don't know. They have a lot of young. They've obviously got a much younger team now, and I think that they're gonna. Yes, they lost a lot defensively. I don't think their defense is going to be in the top upper echelon of the NBA, but I do think that they did bring in a lot of young front court guys who are probably, a lot of them who I think are going to be high energy guys who have the potential to kind of take a step. A lot of these guys are young, and I think that Eric Pascal, Omari Spellman as bigs, those are guys that are perfect to play with Steph, bigs who could, defend at a competent level, or not. I'm talking more so Spellman, but bigs who could stretch the floor. And the fact that they came from Villanova, I think that makes them well suited to transition to a system like Golden State. But I don't know. I think there's a lot of young, hungry guys, and I think there's a little bit of an underdog mentality with Golden State. But that said, like I said, it wouldn't surprise me if maybe 50, 60 games in, they kind of were like, you know what, this ain't our year. But I think they're in the playoffs. The Clippers. I think the Clippers are going to load manage the shit out of Paul George and Kawhi, but that said, they're still going to be good. So I have them as the 2nd seed in the West. Curious to see if Jerome Robinson can take a leap. If this team was able to keep Shea in that OKC trade, that would have been massive, but obviously wasn't the case. But, you still got Lou Will getting buckets off the bench. And you got quality NBA guys like Shamit, um, and I even kind of like JaMychal Green and Rodney McGruder. And this team is deep. So the fact that they maintain a lot of guys who were contributors last year, they didn't kill their depth, and they were able to get Paul George and Kawhi. Plus, you pair that with a championship coach and Doc Rivers. It's really hard to bet against the Clippers. I think they're a lock to be one of the better teams in the West. The Lakers. So the Lakers, I think will be in the playoffs. I'm curious to see. The one thing I'm concerned about is who's going to guard opposing superstar point guards. Who's guarding the James Hardens, the Russell Westbrooks, the Steph Currys, Dame Lillards of the world? Is it Avery Bradley? He'll probably need to rewind the clock if that's the case, or if the Lakers want that to be the case. They have a decent amount of size, and the LeBron AD pick and roll is going to be almost unguardable. But that said, I do feel like this is a team that is really waiting for the playoffs. As in, they're not going balls out to the wall 82 games, even though they do have a lot of quality rotation NBA players. So I mean, they're going to be in the playoffs. LeBron hasn't been this rested. Everyone kind of talked about that all offseason long. But I think they're going to be good. I think they're going to be good. I guess you would hope that they could get a little more shooting in there, but the Lakers, it's going to be awesome to see those Lakers Clippers regular season games, the battle of LA, so to speak. The Phoenix Suns. So I don't think for context, I don't think the Suns are going to be in the playoffs, but the Suns they made major improvements at the point guard spot, which they were not great at in the previous years. They had to actually kind of have Devin Booker be the primary creator and playmaker. But now that they have Ricky Rubio and they also drafted Ty Jerome, I think, you can put Devin Booker a little more off the ball and, have him work a little bit, do a little bit less work in order to get his buckets, which I think is going to be great for Devin Booker. I think that Booker's good. I know that he didn't exactly help his his branding or his image this offseason. But I think Booker's going to be good. And they have quality starters. It's just more so that the West is so deep, and is this team ready to take the next step? Saric is solid, but yeah, Mikal Bridges showed that he's a good NBA player. But like I said, guess we'll have to see. I wouldn't bet on them making the playoffs, but if they made it or they pushed for that 8th seed, wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I guess we'll have to see how Monty Williams is as a coach. I think he was okay in New Orleans. Obviously, he comes from that Spurs kind of pedigree, which so that he's a high character guy. But I don't know. Personal thought, I honestly thought there were better coaching candidates out there than Monty Williams, but not a big deal. Guess we'll see how they are. And that takes us to the last team we're going to talk about, a team that I love to watch with probably one of my favorite players in the NBA, De'Aaron Fox. I will ride or die with De'Aaron Fox to the abyss. I have a De'Aaron Fox shirt. It was the first Nike NBA shirt that I got. So they also signed Tyler Ulis, who I really like, but who knows? We'll see if he stays on the roster. And then they drafted Kyle Guy. I like a lot of the guys that they have. They have this young, exciting nucleus, and then adding Dwayne Dedmon, Trevor Ariza, Corey Joseph to the roster as kind of vets to help around, along with Harrison Barnes and Rashawn Holmes. I like that, but one thing that is hanging over the franchise right now is this Buddy Hield situation. It could get really ugly, and Buddy Hield was really good last year. He's a little older than maybe you would like for a guy coming up or getting an extension off of his rookie contract, but he's one of the best shooters in the NBA. And if you're building a team around De'Aaron Fox, Marvin Bagley, you want a guy who's going to be, you want that role, like one of your starters to be a guy like Buddy Hield, who's going to, run off of screens, hit open threes, take those catch and shoot threes and space the floor out. So a lot of people think that the Kings might not be able to catch as many people off guard this year because people kind of know what to expect, and their half-court offense was not great last year. I'm thinking that I think Luke Walton's a good coach, and that maybe he can figure it out. But I also think that that's why you add in a lot of those vets. And at this point, you're kind of hoping for a lot of internal improvement from the young guys, like De'Aaron Fox. I love De'Aaron Fox so much. Before the draft, I said that De'Aaron Fox was going to be the best point guard from his class. I was adamant on it. I thought he was way better than Lonzo. And yeah, so all that said, I understand that the West is deep and that the odds are not exactly in the Kings' favor. Like, they're definitely not a shoo-in for the playoffs. But I'm gonna go ahead and go on a limb because I believe in a lot of the personnel, especially De'Aaron Fox. And I think that the Kings are going to make the playoffs. So, the teams that I have in the playoffs in the West, I have, and this is my 1 to 8. Though, like I said, the West is just so freaking deep that like you could shuffle around a lot of these teams, and I wouldn't even trip. So, I got Utah that 1, Clips 2, Nuggets 3, Rockets 4. Though honestly, I could see the Rockets being higher now that I think of it. Maybe the Rockets 3, Nuggets 4, Lakers 5, Portland 6, Golden State 7, and then Sacramento 8. I recognize that means only one team from the Southwest Division makes it, and that would be the Rockets. But I do think the Southwest Division is competitive, but it also has Memphis, which, like I said, I expect to be one of the bottom dwellers in the NBA. And I also know that like these 8 teams, I have 4 of the teams from the Pacific making the playoffs. Like I said, I'm a little biased. I want to see the Kings in the playoffs, but we'll see. Like I said, at this point, I don't expect my 1 to 8 to be accurate by any stretch. And then for the East, I got Philly, Milwaukee, Miami, Boston as your 1 to 4, Toronto, Brooklyn, Indiana, and Chicago as the 5 to 8. And like I said, I wouldn't surprise me if Detroit and Orlando were in the playoffs, but I think the East is a little more, quote, open in terms of like seeding and whatnot, more so just because there's more wide open due to parity, like I said. So, yeah. Moving on to awards, I think the MVP, I think everyone's talking a lot about Giannis, Jokic, and Steph as the kind of front runners. The blueprint for Steph would just have to be that he has such a crazy efficient season and has this ridiculous statistical season, and they finish maybe 6th, 5th, or 4th. If that's the case, I think Steph's got it. I'm going to go on a limb and say that if Embiid plays like 72 games, so he misses 10 games, I think Embiid could be MVP, honestly. But if that's not the case, I honestly might have to say Jokic. If the Nuggets end up being the number 1 seed, Giannis obviously has a great chance to repeat, though I don't think that they're as focused on the regular season. I think they're more so just trying to make sure he's good to go in the playoffs. So we'll see. In this era of load management, you really need to see who plays how many games first, and then obviously you want to see how the team, how successful the player's team is. So, by the way, I just want to preface this by saying I don't expect very many of these picks to be on point, but just because I think a lot of this is wide open. But Rookie of the Year, Zion should be the favorite, but with a lot of the health concerns and whatnot, I'm gonna go with Tyler Herro, kind of like I talked about. I also consider Ja, but I think Ja is gonna have a really like statistically great rookie year and really fun rookie year, but I don't know if I feel like the team's not going to win enough, and I feel like that might be used against him, as opposed to like a Zion or Tyler Herro, who I think are going to be on like teams that are in the playoff mix. And if the Heat are going to be like a 3 seed with Herro starting, and he's getting like 17 a game on really efficient shooting and like a couple assists and a couple rebounds, like maybe that might be a little bit of a Tyler Herro fan pipe dream, but hey, if Zion's hurt, like maybe that can happen. So I'm gonna say Zion should be the favorite, but if he's got these lingering health concerns and the Heat overachieved, like don't sleep on Tyler Herro. Defensive Player of the Year, I got to give it to Gobert. Because I think Utah is going to still be one of the better defenses in the league, and he's obviously the reigning Defensive Player of the Year. That takes us to Coach of the Year. I think Snyder is going to get it, but this really could be anyone, right? Like as anyone who finishes in the top 3 of their conference. But I think it's Utah's turn to be the 1 seed in the conference, and so as a result, I think it's going to go to Snyder. Sixth man, I wanted to go with Lou Will. He would, if he won sixth man again of the year again, he would be the first 4-time winner. But I do think that the Clippers are a little. I think that maybe they're not going to play Lou Will. There's not going to be as much of a need for Lou Will to come in and be this microwave guy, just because they added so much top-end talent with Kawhi and Paul George. Plus, maybe there's a little voter fatigue. I'm going to go with Spencer Dinwiddie. I think that I really like what I've seen from him. He's just gotten better the last couple years. And Kyrie has never really been he's never been able to stay healthy. He's always missed like decent amount of games. So I could see Dinwiddie being able to start about 10 to 20 games and really flourishing. And this is all assuming that he even comes off the bench, but I could see him really being like an great all-around two-way threat off the bench, and I think that voters will reward him for that. Most improved, thought about a lot of guys. I know that there's been a lot of buzz about De'Aaron Fox, and trust me, I want to buy all that. I am at the front of the De'Aaron Fox wagon, but the one thing is I feel like De'Aaron Fox took a statistical leap last year that will make it difficult for him to get most improved player. A lot of times, like the most improved player has like quite a statistical leap. And he already had averaged 18-7 last year. So for him to get most improved, he's probably going to have to jump to like 23, 24-9. And look, I think that's well within the realm of possibility. But even if that's the case, I feel like the easier candidate is always a guy who goes from like 4 points a game to 13, or maybe like 10 to 23, like that type of thing, you know? So with that in mind, I don't really have a single favorite. Some guys that I think maybe aren't being talked about enough. I think one guy that might, and I could absolutely eat crow when I say this, but I really think that Dragon Bender, now that he's in Milwaukee, might be in a better situation to succeed. He was like awful statistically in Phoenix. If he's like getting double digits, maybe starting or being like in the main rotation, and Milwaukee's good, like that wouldn't surprise me. Another guy kind of in that similar situation, ironically, who was drafted with him to Phoenix, Marquise Chris. Another guy who I just think was in a bad situations. If he ends up starting for the Warriors and whatnot, I think he could be an interesting guy to keep your eye on. I also think that another guy who could maybe take like a leap is Malik Beasley. He took a little bit of a leap last year. I think statistically he actually improved by like 8 points a game last year, but I think that if he makes a jump, becomes more of a starter, and the Nuggets, remain competitive, I think I could see Malik Beasley being one of the candidates at least for most improved player. So, and then just a couple other candidates. I would say DeJounte Murray. I don't even know how that would count because he missed all of last year. But Bam Adebayo is another good one, just because he's shown flashes, and you know that he's going to be a good NBA player. But this year he might have more of an elevated role. On top of that, you wonder maybe can Jonathan Isaac, as a third-year guy, kind of take a jump and take more of a step forward offensively, because defensively he's been pretty solid, but if offensively he can add 7 points a game to his belt, like that would be a very enticing case for most improved player. And then another guy who I think could take that leap is a second-year guy, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Obviously he's already a great kind of two-way player and a smooth, skilled guy, but he averaged 11 points a game last year. let's say he starts next to Chris Paul. Chris Paul misses about 20 or so, 25 games, and he takes an elevated role there. And let's say he jumps to 18 points a game, 4 rebounds, and 5 assists. Like that's also kind of a recipe for a most improved player candidacy. So, yeah. That's about it with regards to rewards and NBA talk. I expect a lot of this to be really off, and I wish I was doing this podcast with someone else, like my usual partner and Joe, but didn't work out that way. But hey, I'm still so excited for the NBA season, and I'm glad this podcast really let me do kind of revisit my research on what I'm looking forward to. So I'm gonna end things about here. So hopefully you continue to tune in during basketball season. It's going to be a great season on all levels, and stay tuned for all the content that's coming. That's going to come from SplashTag. So if you haven't done so already, once again, appreciate you listening. But if you haven't done so already, please subscribe on whatever medium you're listening to: Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, YouTube, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And I will, next time I talk hoops with you, it will be during it'll be after the NBA season has tipped off. So I'll see you then.